Yeah, we'll start recording. All right, and go take it away.
Okay, so we're up to Nun Hey Amud Aleph. We started the Mishnah last week. Interesting Mishnah that the Mishnah essentially repeats the halacha from prior. The Kasha the Gemara asks, why are you repeating? And basically, what we came up with is that the repetition was an introduction to what the Mishnah says are 5 situations where you need a pruta in order for the event to happen. In other words, the question is, as an example, if a person finds an object and the object is less than a pruta, so the Mishnah tells us, that's the halacha, that you don't have to do Hashavah Saveda because it's not worth a pruta. So pruta, and for instance, a man marries a woman, you have to have a chayfetz, usually the ring, which is Shava Pruta. So the Mishnah enumerates 5 categories of where you need this Pruta. Comes the Gemara, that's where we ended last week, and the Gemara brings down from Levi, that Levi, the Gemara says that there are 5 categories, and he only overlaps 3 of the 5 with the Mishnah, and the other 2 he says are different. We're going to go over what those differences are, and that's where we're going to pick up the Gemara, because the Gemara is going to discuss the differences between Levi and between the Mishnah. So let's take a quick look at the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Chamesh prutas hain, there are 5 cases of pruta. Hahodah shava pruta. A hodah, if someone has a chiyuv because of a shvua, that requires a pruta. But isha miskadeshes, a woman that gets married has to have a shava pruta. If someone has hanor from hegdish, remember we talked about me'ilah, about bringing the carbon, that requires a pruta, it has to be worth a pruta that you're having hanor from hegdish, otherwise it's not, it doesn't count. Someone who finds an object has to have a pruta, and hagozelas avero, if someone steals from his friend and later and he swears, and then he admits his shvua was not correct, then that needs a pruta. And the Mishnah ends by saying that not only does it need a pruta, but he uses the term that we said that in order to sort of get absolution, or to get from the nigzal, from the person from whom you stole, to sort of basically get an admit. Well, I want to say a waiver, but he has to give you mechila. So you have to run him down all the way to Moda. You can't send a shaliach and say, Ruven, here's your pruta I stole from you, etc., etc. That doesn't work. You have to actually do it face to face. So those are the 5 of the Mishnah. Comes Levi and says that no, there are several differences from what the Mishnah says, and he says ha'ona pruta, that if someone commits price fraud, meaning that the whole halacha of ona has to have a pruta, which is not everybody agrees to that. And then he also says hoidah, which we know, kedusha isha, which we know, gezel, which we know, but he comes with a 5th that is different. Yeshivas hadayanim b'pruta, that if the judges convene a bezdin in order to hear a case, then the case has to have, whatever the case is, case has to have a minimum of a pruta. So his 5 are somewhat different. He adds oinah, and he adds yeshivas hadayanim, and from the Mishnah's 5, we say that in other words, Shabbos Haveda falls away, and Me'ila, the case of Hegdish, falls away. So we have
I'd say a court case for a pruta, that would be very small claims court.
that would be small claims court, right? That would be the original small claims. So the kasha now becomes, which the Gemara is going to try to reconcile it, is why there's a chiluk, but what the Mishnah and Levi do with those that they don't say have to be a pruta, or they don't announce have to be a pruta. So the Gemara is going to try to delve into this to see what this machlokes is and why and what each one holds on the others two, so to speak, that are required of pruta. Okay. So now the Gemara starts Vitana Didon. And our Tana, meaning the Tana of our Mishnah, who wants to say, is everybody with me? It's maybe about, I don't know, 20 lines from the bottom. So the Tana Didon is like the middle of the line.
It's in my Gemara, at least, it's vertically right between Talazu on the left and the beginning and the Gemara, where the Gemara of the Rashi starts on the right.
Yeah. Okay.
Right between that.
More or less. Yeah. Okay. So the Tana Didon, the kasha is our Tana, my Tama Lokatani Yeshiva Sadayanim. So we start with Yeshiva Sadayanim, we'll get to the others. And the kasha is, why do they not include Yeshiva Sadayanim in their 5 in the Mishnah? The Chayra, it seems to be it's a very valid point. Says the Gemara, Tonale Gazel. The reason why we don't have Yeshiva Sadayanim, because we already have Gezel, theft, and from theft, since theft is with a pruta, and theft would be something that would come before the Dayanim as a case. Therefore, we kind of infer that the Yeshiva Sadayanim is not less than let's say, Gezel, which would be a case they would adjudicate. So there's a seichel here. Why the Mishnah doesn't say Yeshiva Sadayanim? Because it has Gezel, and there's a hemshich, there's a connection between Gezel and Yeshiva Sadayanim. Correct the Gemara, Umilo Tani Gezel Tani Aveda. You're telling me that because we have Gezel, we don't need Yeshiva Sadayanim. What do we need Gezel for if we have Aveda? If a person finds an Aveda and he has to return it, it has to be a Shava Pruta, would you not even think that Gezel should also be? In other words, these are common sense heckish
questions.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Jay, you had a question?
No, I just.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
It's a common day
very simple question. Since you're telling me that you don't need Yeshiva Sadayanim because you have Gezel, and common sense tells you that Gezel's Bepruta and Yeshiva Sadayanim Bepruta, can't you say the same thing about Aveda? What do I need to have Aveda and Gezel? They both stem from the same, more or less the same thinking. In which case, why do you need both of them? You shouldn't have to have both of them. So that question then resonates further down, because once you're starting to make these connections, then you can sort of a lot of these different principles from another principle.
But this is not a Kal V'chomer.
Sorry?
This is not a Kal V'chomer.
No, it's not a Kal V'chomer, it's a hekesh. It's a comparison. In other words, if you're telling me that Gezel Bepruta negates having to have Yeshivas Dayanim, because common sense tells you that the Dayanim would sit in a case of Gezel, therefore they have to have a Pruta, then why not use the same common sense theory with respect to Gezel and Aveda? In other words, unless you can find some daylight, and the Gemara is going to go through this now, but unless you find some daylight between Aveda and Gezel, then they also seem to come from the same, more or less the same sort of source. Why do you need both? If Aveda is Bepruta, then Gezel is Bepruta, so you don't need Gezel, or vice versa.
But the two actions are so totally different. Why would you automatically say?
Well, there may be different actions, but they require recovery. Aveda requires a recovery because you've got to give it back to the owner, And Gezela requires a recovery because you have to give it back to the owner. So in that regard, they are quite similar. Why would you not say that Shava Pruta by one equates to Shava Pruta by another? So
because in one
the
case
answer is better than the question, Jay. The answer is better.
but in one case you have an Avera.
Say it
So you
again?
could argue that the Avera does, since one case has an Avera, you can't use another example that doesn't have an Avera.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. So
It's an event to return the item.
Yeah, but there's no action. There's only an Avera of not returning when somebody finds it. The other case is an actual Gezela. Somebody stole something intentionally.
Okay, so listen to the Gemara's answer. It's not quite what you're saying, but there is a connection. So look at the Gemara's answer. Hanach itzbechale. We need to have it. We need to have Gezela and Aveda. Why? Regarding Gezel, Hagozel mechaver shava pruta v'nishbalo. If someone steals a pruta or shava pruta, and he swears falsely, and then he admits. So now we're saying that case can only be adjudicated with a pruta. Then what was the upshot of that case in the Mishnah? You have to return it. Yolichenu achra afilu modai. That it's not sufficient that you send a shaliach to return the item. You have to personally return it face to face, even if you go halfway around the world. That's the chiddush. Not quite what you said, although your point is a good one, that one is gezel and one is aveda. In other words, one is committing an avera, committing a sin. So the Gemara doesn't hang its hat on that, but it hangs its hat on the fact that we need Gezela to tell us not that you return it, but that you have to return it even to Modai. That's the Chiddush by Gezela. By Aveda, you just have to return it. There isn't, like you say, there's no sin. There's nothing so it's not the sin, it's the returning that's different between Aveda and Gezela. Therefore, that's why I say it's not quite what you said, but yes, Gezela requires much more of an effort, and that's why it's included. Clearly, it has to have a pruta just like Aveda, but it's not enough that you just, okay, I'll return it to you here. My shaliach Reuven will drop it off at your house on the way to work. No, it doesn't work that way.
So they chose the returning process as showing the need for
the need to have them, right?
Rather than choosing the Avera difference.
Right. So and the Gemara goes on to say, but Hamusi Aveda Shava Pruta, if someone finds an object that has to be with the Pruta Chayv Lahachris, then he has to return it to the Balabos V'af Al Gav the Zeil. Now here's the Chiddush. What happens if a person lost an item, and the item remains lost, and now the item depreciates in value? So let's say what was worth a pruta may be worth 3/4 of a pruta because maybe it was precious metal and the stock market for metal went down, so now it's worth 3/4 of a pruta. The chiddush is afal gaf de zeil, even a veda that depreciated in price, you still have to chayav lahachlis. So in other words, we're talking about returning now, right? The issue is returning. Yeah. There's a difference between gezela, which requires an ultra extra effort to return afilu l'modai, and aveda, which not only requires returning, but requires returning if at the end of the day it's not even worth a pruta. So in other words, each one has a separate reason for being included in this group of 5 because they're different. So this is what the Gemara wants to show us, is that not all, even though in theory an aveda and a gezela may be the same because you have to return something, and if you have to return it, it has to be with the shava pruta. And you make a good point, Jay, by saying, well, one is an avera, one is not an avera. But the Gemara says that the reason why they're both included because the return policy is different for each of them, and it's different from every other case in the Mishnah. Because we're going to see that the others in the Mishnah doesn't follow this. Yeah, go ahead.
So why would they bring up the depreciation? His obligation is to return exactly what he stole.
Right, but if what what he found, you mean? But if what he found is less than a pruta at the time he finds it, you might think that it's not worthy of returning, because when he found it, it was less than a pruta. The teretz is it was worth a pruta. Again, we have to analyze this. But if it was a pruta when it was lost, that stays intact, even if later on, by the time of the finding, it wasn't worth a pruta. You still go back to when he lost it.
You have to go back to what the loss situation is.
The loss situation, right. That's what we look at. That's the by Aveda.
At the recovery situation.
Not the recovery, correct. So, okay, so at least in the Tana of our Mishnah, we've gone through several questions about why one is needed. L'chayra, it looks a lot like the other. And the Gemara gives us a teretz and says that there are differences. And because there are differences, those nuanced differences are different. So now we understand that even Yeshivas Dayanim, which was the first question, is different because Yeshivas Dayanim, although it looks a little bit like Gezela, but because the return policy by Gezela is different, it has to be separately enunciated. Yeah. And Yeshivas Dayanim, which doesn't have that return policy issue, right? It's straight. Therefore, it's a standalone, and Yeshivas Dayanim is a standalone. Okay. So we've gotten into a little bit the Mishnah, and we see the differences. Now the Gemara is going to analyze what about Levi. Levi has a different sequence. He only includes 3 of the 5, and he has 2 different ones. Correct? The Gemara, the Levi, my tam alotani aveda bepruta. He omits aveda. Why does he not teach the laws of aveda? For the very reason that we just said, is because what happens if it's depreciates, if it's zeal, if it goes down in value? Does he not hold that? What does he hold? Enfrit the Gemara, Tonale Gozel, that since Levi says Gezela is included, so his answer is what the question was in the Mishnah. Therefore, because it says Gezela, therefore,
yeah. So the Gezela then now derives the return.
Right. So he's not questioning the Modai portion of Gezela. In other words, he doesn't worry about the return. He's only worrying about the valuation at the time of the theft. So Levi's thinking is different than the Tana of the Mishnah. The Tana of the Mishnah goes on the return policy, like we just said. But Levi, doesn't hold from that. Right? Why don't you hold Aveda? Tana le Gozel. Tana le Gozel. So according to him, you don't have to have a Veda because you have Gezela, which the Tana of our Mishnah argues and says, no, you need both. Frek the Gemara here on Levi, Umila Ketana Gezel Ketana Yeshivas Dayanim. Now, if you're going to tell me you don't need a Veda because you have Gezela, so then I'll ask you the same question. If I have Gezela, what do I need Yeshivas Dayanim for? Okay, it's the reverse of what we said by the time of the Mishnah. So now that we have Gezela and it's Shava Pruta, and a Gezela is a case that comes before the court, why do we need Yeshivas Dayanim? We know Yeshivas Dayanim has to have a Pruta because you see that Gezela has a Pruta, and Gezela is something that they would adjudicate. So now the question reverse is, why do you need Yeshivas Dayanim? You're adding Yeshivas Dayanim. Oh, big Kiddush. What do you need Yeshivas Dayanim for? You have Gezela. That's the Gemara's kasha. And for the Gemara, Yeshivas Dayanim Itzrichalei. You know what? We need Yeshivas Gezela, Yeshivas Dayanim. Why? La'afuke midarav Katina. So Amora Banim Rav Katina, he said something controversial, which requires us to say Yeshivas Dayanim has to be included. What did he say? Rav Katina. Katina says, Bezdin niskaken afil lapachas mishava pruta. He comes outright and says, no such thing. Bezdin can adjudicate less than a shava pruta. So that's a premise that we have heretofore not said. We've said that you have to have Yeshivas Dayanim bepruta, and then the kasha on Levi is if it's Yeshivas Dayanim bepruta, what do you need it for? You have Gezela. He comes to tell us, you know why you need Yeshivas Dayanim? Because Dayanim can sit even less than a pruta. So Rav Katina is out there, and we're going to see the Gemara a little bit later, how we understand Rav Katina. But Rav Katina's view is that Yeshivas Dayanim does not need a pruta. Okay, so now, that's answered.
Now, does the one who lose something, he goes to court just like returning goes to court? Does the Gazela victim go to court also and have the
No. The Shabbos Aveda doesn't go to court. But Shabbos, the question is, if you find an article, and the Torah tells us you have a mitzvah of a Shabbos Aveda, do you have a mitzvah of Shabbos Aveda if it's only a pruta? Has nothing to do with court. The court issue was Gezel, but not Aveda. Aveda.
They don't go to court and say, I want to announce in town.
No, you just have to go to you go into the shul or to the public square. Just you have to make sure that enough people here. If you go to the public square, and I remember again, those of you who've been to England, there's a place called Hyde's Corner. Hyde's Corner, where everybody stelzt a chavek and they start giving drushes. If you go to Hyde's Corner, mistama, it'll be heard because the word goes forth as it goes forth from Zion, So basically, the halacha is that you have a Shabbos Aveda, but if it's not with a pruta, then you don't have to have a Shabbos Aveda. So that's a different hemshech to Gzela than Yeshivas Dayanim. Yeah. But right now, we're saying that Yeshivas Dayanim, Levi holds like Rav Katina, and Rav Katina says that Yeshivas Dayanim is even less than a pruta. Okay, so now we have a distinction between the two. Now, Frek the Gemara. Okay, so Frek the Gemara, different kasha. The Levi, my Tamalak Hegdish. Remember that the Mishnah is talking about Me'ila, that if you are Moel Behegdish, that you have to, and you have a Northern Shabbat Pruta, then you have to give a carbon, and you have to a Chaimish and everything else. So then, my Tamalak Hegdish, that's a very important one. Why is Levi not including Hegdish in his list of 5? And for the Gemara, B'chulin Komairi, Levi's only talking about mundane, regular matters. B'kachim lo Komairi, he's not talking about kachim. All right, so it's a fine distinction. Kachim is for another day. So since he says that he only talks about chulin, meaning regular items, therefore he doesn't include kachim. Okay, it may or may not be a strong answer, but it's an answer. So that Levi says, at least he can show consistency that there is no kachim issue, and therefore he doesn't include me'ila. Okay, fine. So that's the answer on Levi. Now that we answered Levi, now the kasha goes back on our Mishnah, the Tana of our Mishnah, Elatana Didan, the Komaira B'Kachim. But the Tana of our Mishnah, who does talk about Kachim, right? This Nemasa B'Pruta. Why? So now we're going to open another door. The door we're opening on the Tana of our Mishnah is, since he already talks about Kachim, why doesn't he include Masa Sheni? Maser or Maser Sheni. Why doesn't he include Maser in the laws of a Pruta? Now that you open the door and said we're talking about Kachim, Mela Levi doesn't talk about Kachim. But the Tana of our Mishnah talks about Kachim because he talks about Me'ila. Why does he not include Maser? In other words, we're going back and forth and we're finding categories that we're saying either Levi or the Tana should have included and he didn't include. So we have to sort of dance around this question. So this is a question on the Talmud. It's a good kasha. Why doesn't he include Maser? That Maser needs a pruta. Less than pruta, you don't give Maser. We know this from our previous Gemara that Maser Sheni, if it wasn't with a pruta, you can't exchange it. You can't even exchange it for an item. And for the Gemara, so the Gemara says, "Command the Oma ein bechum sho pruta." You know what? There is a machlokes as to whether or not not in the Masa Sheni, but in the Chomesh. Remember, we said Masa Sheni, if you redeem it, you have to give a Chomesh. So the Gemara says
1/5,
1/5. You have to, if you redeem it yourself, you have to add a 5th. The Gemara is saying no. Maser, you can't redeem. You need more than a pruta. You need more than a pruta for Maser. It's the Chomesh that we're talking about where you have to have a pruta. right? So, and that's a machlokes. So the Tana of our Mishnah will hold according to the Manda Omar, who says, Ein bechum pruta. So now we're getting into the weeds, because the kasha was that maser should be included in shava pruta. The answer is maser isn't included in shava pruta because you need more than a pruta. The answer is a pruta is not sufficient. You have to have more than a pruta in order for you to give maser. But the machlokes is in chomesh, whether or not you have a pruta. And the Tana of our Mishnah holds like the Mande Omar, who says, Ein bechum shel pruta, that you don't need a pruta for chomesh. A chomesh you have to give, even if it's less than a pruta. Because chomesh, it's not a fine, it's kind of like an ad valorem tax. Let's call it, it's an add-on tax that the Chazal said, if you redeem your own item, not someone else's, but your own item, you have to give an extra fifth. And that's a machlokes whether or not that has to be bepruta. So our Manda Omar holds like the one who says it doesn't need a pruta, and therefore it's not mentioned. Maser itself isn't mentioned because Maser needs more than a pruta. But even the chomesh is not mentioned because he holds ein chumsha bepruta, that you don't need a pruta for a chomesh. Again, these are all kind of examples of how in the Shakla B'Torah, going back and forth, we appreciate a lot of these questions, and the questions are sometimes asked for the answer. In other words, we see that it's the answers that are determining the differences between different items, like we saw before, Jay, with Gezel and Yeshivas Bezdin. So here too, the kasha is, why not Maser? The answer is because Maser doesn't fit the bill. Maser has to be given with more than a pruta, and the chomesh doesn't have to have a pruta. Therefore, there's no purpose in including. There's no road to getting Maser into this discussion. Okay. Now, Frek the Gemara. So now the Gemara has another kasha. V'lisnei chomesh Maser bepruta. Why does not the Tana of the Mishnah, why won't he say that you can't even redeem Maser Sheni unless the chomesh is worth a pruta? In other words, why doesn't he state that as a given? You're telling me what? That he holds a kontamanda mein b'chum pruta in order. In other words, to fit Maser Sheni into this category, let him say you do need a pruta. Okay, so this Tana, the Tana of our Mishnah, he should say that you need a chomesh worth a pruta in order to redeem Maser Sheni. That if you don't have a pruta, you can't even redeem the Maser Sheni. So, in other words, so that's the kasha. So he's turning the kasha around. Is if the tail is going to wag the dog. If you don't have a pruta in the chomesh, you can't redeem the Maser Sheni. We're going to sort of flip it around. Why does he not say that? That's kind of a question. It's not directly related to our thing, but he's saying, why don't you flip it and say, we really have to have Maser Sheni because the chomesh has to have a pruta. Otherwise, we're not going to allow you to redeem the Maser Sheni. So again, the Gemara gives an answer. But Karna Komairi, that we're going to split a little bit of a different hair here, and we're going to say that the subject matter of our Mishnah, when it talks about Chomesh, is only talking Bekarna, Bekeren, meaning in the principle, that the principle always has to be a pruta, Bechomesh lo Komairi, and the Chomesh, which is disputable, the Mishnah is not addressing. Again, so it falls on a fine line here as to why this Tana is excluding or including items. And we're saying here by Maser, even though it's a good kasha that a chomesh should have a pruta in order for the Maser Sheni to be valid, But the Gemara is saying that, you know what, we're not addressing Chodesh. We're only addressing Keren. And Keren, we say that the Keren has to have a pruta. So it's kind of, again, a distinction that obviously it doesn't have the same, we don't worry about it today. Today, we say the same thing. La halacha, for instance, an Aveda has to have a pruta. Less than an Aveda, less than a pruta, you don't do a Shabbos Aveda. That survives today, Ba'al Pi halacha. This whole question of Maser and Chomesh doesn't survive the halacha because you need a Beis Hamikdash. So we don't have a Beis Hamikdash, therefore we can't have the issue. But with regard to those things that are survivable today, definitely you have to have a Shava Pruta in order for the transaction or the action to have any value. So if it's less than a Shava Pruta, we don't include it. Okay, now we're going to conclude this portion by going back and understanding. Remember, the Gemara said before by Levi that the reason why Levi doesn't include Yeshivas Adayonim because he holds Rav Katina. Rav Katina says Bezdin Niskakin Afil Apachas B'Shava Pruta, that a Bezdin will convene even less than a Shava Pruta. So how do we understand that? Says the Gemara Gufa Amar Rav Katina Bezdin Niskakin Afil Apachas B'Shava Pruta. In other words, Gufa, take note, a head note. Rav Katina says that Afila less than a Pruta you convene. Frek the Gemara Mosif Rava. So Rava asks a kasha. How? In other words, he's going to try to slug over Rav Katina. It says in the pasuk, "Ve'eseh shechata min hakodesh yishalem." The Torah says that whatever you did chet, in other words, whatever sin you committed against the hegdish, that's what you shall pay. Okay, so you have to pay the equivalent of what you've taken from hegdish. The rabos, pruta. Notice the word. Remember, we talked about words and letters, that sometimes an extra letter has a very important effect on the interpretation of the parsha. So here, the Torah could have said, and it has a vav yisera. It says ve'es. Says the Gemara, that vav is l'rabos pachos m'sheva pruta, is that that less than a shava pruta also has to be returned. So l'chayre, there is this inyan. But what is the inyan? The Gemara says, it says the kodesh in, aval lahedjet lo. So the Gemara does an inference here from this word ve'es that the vava yisera includes less than a shava pruta. When? Only by kodesh, only by hegdish, not by other things. And Levi doesn't want to talk about hegdish because Levi said before, we're only talking about hedget. We're only talking about mundane, regular events. Gezela, Aveda, Mikadeshes Isha. These are non-Kodesh related things. But Rav Katina specifically said that you don't include Gezel because he holds that you do convene a court with less than a Shava Pruta. Says the Gemara here that the inference from this pasuk is that for Kodesh, right, you need a Shava Pruta. The Bezdin will not entertain. In other words, basically, you need a Shava Pruta for Hegdish, but Hegdish, you don't need a Pruta. So l'chayra, this is a kasha and Rav Katina. Because Rav Katina says across the board, the Bezdin will sit with less than a Shava Pruta. From this pasuk, we see that the Kodesh, then less than a Shava Pruta is significant. Why? Because it's Kodesh. But by mundane, but by other items, if it isn't a Shava Pruta, it has no value. So how could Rav Katina say then because from Rav Katina, it seems like in every circumstance, the Beis Din will convene with less than a Shava Pruta. And here, from this pasuk, we're learning out that they will not convene if it's a hedged. Only if it's Kodesh, they'll convene. So, l'chayra, this is a kasha of Rav Katina. How can why does Levi not include Gezel in mundane matters? Rav Katina's theory doesn't apply. It only applies by Kodesh because of the pasuk ve'es, but by hedged it doesn't apply. So l'chayra, that's a kasha, all right? Kodesh and the hegdishlo, elo. So another right. So we're clear on the kasha. The kasha is Rav Katina says yeshivas Beis Din is in all cases, and we learn from this pasuk that it's only in the case of Kodesh, because Kodesh has a higher madrega. Therefore, we say in Kodesh you have to have you don't have to have a pruta, but by every chol matters you do have to have a pruta. So that's the kasha. So now the Gemara is going to give a teretz. Elo itmar hachi itmar. So again, we see this very often. The Gemara is now going to adjust the words of the Gemara to better understand what this chiluk is. Amar Rav Katina, this is what Rav Katina says. This is now the newer version of Rav Katina. Im huzku Beis Din l'shava pruta. If the court convened a case because there was a shava pruta, no question about it, gomrim afilu lepachas m'shava pruta. What does this remind us of? This reminds us of Aveda, Jay. But Jay, we said that what? That when you have an Aveda that starts out wearing a pruta and then later on is devalued to less than a pruta, you still have to do a Shabbos Aveda, right? So we know that exists. Says the Gemara, the same with Rav Katina. If the Beis Din sits, you have to have a Shava Pruta, no question about it. Not that you don't have to have a Shava Pruta, you have to have a Shava Pruta. But if it's Gomrin, if the value depreciates less than a Shava Pruta, the Beis Din can still adjudicate the case, but Tchilas Hadin be'inim Pruta, Gemar Din lo be'inan. The beginning of the din needs a pruta. The end of the din doesn't need a pruta. So in other words, that which Levi says he's relying on Rav Katina, because Rav Katina says that Yeshiva said Dayanim Itzruchalei that Tulafukim and Rav Katina is no longer valid, because he said originally that Rav Katina says it doesn't need a pruta. That's why you have to have yeshivas dayanim separate from gezela. Now we're saying that yeshivas dayanim is also only with a pruta. But why is it not learned from gezela? For the same reason that we have Aveda different from gezela, we have yeshivas dayanim different from gezela, because gezela has a whole different parsha that you have to return a afilu l'moda. But Yeshivas Dayanim, if it depreciates in value, you still have to return it. So that's the chiddush why it has to say Yeshivas Dayanim separate from Gezela. Again, what we see is that each one of these in the return portion of our program, in the return portion of the program, are different enough that even if they're the same in the initial part of the program, they are distinctive enough on the return that you require them both. So at the end of the day, what we have is two Manda Omrim, our Tana of our Mishnah, and we have Levi. Each one has three in common, two not in common. And we went back and forth. The two not in common, we sort of juxtapose differences why the other doesn't say the other two. In the case of Levi, because of Kodesh Me'ila, therefore you don't include Kedushin. I mean, there's a teretz for each one of them. But at the end of the day, if you look at it, you can honestly say that there are 7 conditions between the Tana of the Mishnah and Levi. We have 3 the same, 2 different. So more or less, we have 7, not 5 instances, if you want to combine them and look at them, because there's a legitimate reason why each one says separate. So therefore, we have 7, not 5, and these are all what we require a minimum of a pruta. All right, so let's look at Rashi. Okay, so B'yeshivas hadayanim b'pruta, misheyesh lo edim, or shechayev moda v'hu mishalem, yeshu hadayanim yichaper also. So he is interpreting what means yeshivas hadayanim, that they have to sit in judgment if a person brings edim, that the person either swore falsely or has to return, owes him money. So the dayanim, they have a role. And we're saying that they have to have bepruta. Torah gezel, given the Torah gezel bepruta, shmamina mamonahu b'chafina. So since it says gezel, so we know that in the case of mominus, which again mominus would go to a bezdin. So at that point in time, we ask, why do you need yeshivas dayanim if you have gezel? Hanach itzlach le gezel. Says Rashi lashminan dilechenu achro. So he's explained what we said before, that by Gezel you have a different requirement of Holach Acha Modai, that you have to go to the far ends of the earth in order to get be absolved from the theft. Afagav Dezal Metzia lahachriza. Again, so now what we said is that from the time of the Metzia to the time of the returning, it depreciated in value. So you would think, since he's only coming into the picture on the hachraza, on the return, and the return is not worth a shava pruta, why should he return it? He's finding an object that isn't worth a pruta. Teretz is because in the Metzia. Now the interesting question is, if this guy is, let's say this finder is a baki, and he sees an item and he says, oh, wait a minute, this isn't worth a pruta. I know it's not worth a pruta because I'm on the stock market and I know this is a piece of metal that just was devalued to less than a shava pruta. So
he may not know what it started
off. No, that's the point. He may not know, but so this is giving us a chiddush that if he sees it and understands it's not worth a pruta, he'll also understand that it was once worth a pruta. If he has any knowledge, I mean, I go along and I see something, and I'm not wired. I don't know the metal market, so how do I know whether this is a pruta or not? So to me, it's an item that looks like it's a pruta. It's a pruta. But to someone who knows that it's not a pruta because it went down in value, he also knows that at one point in time it was a pruta because he's smart enough and knowledgeable enough.
But that's a small percentage of the population.
Exactly right, which is why this issue doesn't really come up a lot, is because when you see something, you have a havamina that it's a pruta. What's a pruta? A pruta is almost a throwaway. It's almost nothing. So isn't almost anything worth a pruta? I mean, you can conceptually say anything is worth a pruta, even a used toothpick. But the point is that here he's saying that if someone actually knows that it is less than a shava pruta and he has the knowledge, then he would have the knowledge that it was worth a pruta at one point, and therefore he can't say, oh, this is less than a shava pruta, I don't have to return it, because he knows it was worth a pruta. That's the chiddush, I think, of what we're saying. You're right, it's a very small percentage of the population, but it's enough to say that if someone knows, he knows. Okay. Says Rashi weiter, Listna Masa Bepruta, the Batsi Mehacha lo Chafis Pidyono, because less than this he can't exchange his pidyon, as we can't redeem it if it's less than a pruta. Why does it not include it? So we gave a teretz. I mean, according to Mandamer, it's not kodesh. L'rabas pachas the at dorish the call asin v'gama revuyin. So he says it includes shava pruta because of the pasuk. Because of the pasuk says ace by kodesh. So therefore, it's regardless of whether it was less than a shava pruta. By kodesh, we have a different standard, which is again why it's not included by Levi, because Levi isn't talking about kachin. Only the Tana of our Mishnah is talking about kachin.
So when a person walks in the street, is he obligated to look at something on the ground and then try to do this analysis or whatever? Or can you just keep walking?
Well, okay, so that's a good question. So I'll say the following. If you don't see it, obviously, I mean, if you're walking with your nose in the air, you won't see it. But what does Chazal tell us? That a Jew walks looking downward. This is what a Jew does. I mean, Jay, when you walk to shul, I mean, your head isn't high looking at Shemayim.
I don't want to trip, so I'm looking down all the time.
That's the point, is that a Yid always has, again, maybe it's because of a Shabbos Aveda, I don't know, but a Yid always looks, even if he's looking straight ahead, he's looking downward. So it would not be hard for him to find something in the street. Okay, for someone else, oh, I'm too refined to touch something that's on the street, and therefore I'm not going to give a Shabbos Aveda. Fakert, a Shabbos Aveda is a mitzvah that requires you to be at least aware when you're walking and you see something and you look down and you see it, that you don't pass it by. Just
Okay,
like
so most things that are lying in the street for any amount of time, they get dirty or they start rusting or this and that.
right.
So right away you have to get involved with, if this thing has been sitting here for a month, it's not the same condition as if it was just a day.
Right.
But when many you find something that's really been there a long time,
yeah,
then you
so
have to figure out what.
Yeah. I think there's a common sense test.
Upstream.
There's got to be a common sense test here, that when you're walking along and you see a chayfetz in the ground, you see something on the ground. I mean, what do we see? You can find an article of clothing. You can find, I'm not talking about money, finding a dime or a quarter or whatever, but you find something, the likelihood is someone dropped it. And therefore, the hakara is that you're going to be machzir. How much effort you have to put in is a separate question. You don't have to go running around. I mean, you post a sign in shul, found, a baseball cap. A baseball cap could be worth $1, 50 cents, whatever it is. Okay, so if you're at least have some, you can't just say, oh, I found something that has value, and you go to wherever the oilam go. Where does the oilam go? In shul, and you go to a lost and found, right? I mean, if you see something in the street, where are you going to post it? On a lamppost? I see on a lamppost, cat missing. If you find a cat, they describe the cat and tell you that the cat is missing and that you have to call such and such a number. So, in other words, in every society, there is a place where somehow someone can post something. And again, this is halacha. Shabbos Aveda is halacha. So the question is, how far do you have to dedicate yourself and be matriach in order to return a lost item? And again, the Torah is not going to put an onus on us to do something that is extremely hard. But how hard is it to at least, you post something in a public place, wherever the public place is, that's where you post it. You can feel you've at least accomplished that, and therefore you've not violated that mitzvah. I mean, I think that's kind of common sense, but that's what we have to do. So it says,
Rabbi, the language of the Torah, which we had yesterday on this subject, is you shouldn't hide yourself.
Correct.
You can't make believe you didn't see it.
That's the point. You can't just go by and say, I didn't see that, and therefore I'm not going to return it. So, and since we are conscientious about all these things, therefore it's incumbent upon us to do something. Im husku bezdin l'shava pruta. So if the bezdin said that they said it's worth a pruta, is ben taveya lenitva. So this is an interesting point, is that if I come to Bezdin and I say, David, you owe me a pruta for whatever the reason. So Bezdin will convene the Bezdin. Now, you would never have come to me and say, Tuvia, you owe me a half a pruta, because Bezdin won't accept it. But if I sue you for the pruta, you can now sue me for the half a pruta. The door has been open, and this is what we know. Even in civil law, is that we're not worried about Shava Pruta, But in civil law, if I sue you, then you can counterclaim, regardless of anything, you can counterclaim against me. Why? Because I've opened the door. You might not have come against me, so why are you allowed to come against me now? Because I've opened the door. With regard to a pruta, says the Gemara, says Rashi to explain the Gemara, that since I've opened the door, right? I've opened the door with a pruta, you can now come back at me with less than a pruta. That's the chiddush, is that you are now able to claim anything you want because I've opened the door. So that is really how the Gemara answers, and so that's the halacha. So next week, Mitzvah Shem, we're going to continue on this subject, but it's a little bit different, with also the subject of evaluations. I just want to conclude, since we're in the Yemei Elul and we're a few weeks before Rosh Hashanah, that there's a beautiful vort that I saw, because I gave Shalosh Shudas for my father's yard site, and I said this, and it's a beautiful vort from the Chassam Sofer. The Chassam Sofer says that in this week's parsha by the Yefas Toar, it says that she has to cry for her father and mother, and the discussion whether it means her real parents or whether it means avodah zarah, whatever. But she has to cry. Say Chazal that, and the Zohar brings us down to that the Shloshim Yomim is Yemei Elul, right? That it's the Yemei Elul, and that's the 30 days. And Bachsa means we have to cry. We have to daven. We have to cry to Ribono Shel Olam that this is a very important time for us. Says the Chassam Sofer, just a beautiful word. He says Yerech Yamin. What's Pshat Yerech Yamin? Because we know, for instance, by Ksuba, when we recite the Ksuba, it's very meticulous, and we talk about Chodesh Elul, Chodesh Tishrei. So we say the month is such and such. In a get, we don't use the word Chodesh, we use Yerech Yomim. What's the chilik? So on the one hand, a Chodesh is the Shorish Chodesh. It's new. So we say by a Ksuba, since the couple's getting married, everything, it's a beautiful thing, so it's Chodesh. By a get, since it's closure, so Yerech Yomim is used by closure, which is why by Elul, when we're closing the old year, the Torah uses the term Yerech Yomim, which means that in Yemei Elul we daven and we close the year. Says the Chassam Sofer, and he wasn't the Chassidish Rebbe, but nevertheless he says, what is the gematria of Yerech Yomim? The gematria of Yerech Yomim is 318. 318 is the gematria of the word siach. Siach is prayer, to daven. In other words, Erech Yomim. What do you do, Erech Yomim? You're siach. In other words, you daven. So he makes the equation between Elul and daven. Then he says, what happened on the Chodesh Elul? On the Chodesh Elul, Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Sinai, and he was makabel the second luchas. When did he come down? He came down on Yom Kippur. 40 days. Says the Chassam Sofer, 40 days. If you take the mem, 40, and you add it to Siach, you get Mashiach. This isn't Rebbe Shatira, this is the Chassam Sofer. So he says, when you daven, Elul, and you have Kavana, and you're Bachsa, and you cry, and you plead to the Ribono Shel Olam, then at the end of the day, you have Kabbalah's Mashiach. So maybe be Zayfet to Mashiach Tzidkenu b'meher b'yameinu. But listen, these parshas, these Shivit and the Chemta from Tisha B'Av to all the way through the Yom Tov are very, very powerful parshas. Each one of them gives us a very strong insight into the period, meaning Elul and Rosh Hashanah. And here we see that how one looks at this. Even though the Torah is talking about a Metzias, Kisei Tzal Malchama, Yifei Torah, nevertheless, this is all about Klal Yisrael and about our Rechrayas. So Taka maybe be Zocha through our Tfilas to be Mekabel of Mashiach and to be Shalom be Yisrael and Shalom and Klal Yisrael.
Amen.
All right.
Sure.
So B'Tz Hashem.